Today we're introducing Talu Sehra-Eckoff, who is a global happiness coach at Happy Matters Coaching. We met at the Happitude Head Heart Fest in December. Talu, welcome to the show.
So welcome everybody. So I'm Talu and I'm here today with Ashok Bhattacharya. Hope I said that correctly.
Perfectly.
Yes, and so the reason for us to come together all started last year at the end of December, where Happitude India and where I'm also a coach, and we put together a Head Heart Festival where we brought experts and global speakers from all over the world together to talk about happiness at work. And it was a 3-day event. So the first day was all about happiness as an advantage. Day 2 was talking about compassion and profit. And day 3 was bringing that best self to work. And I think not only ourselves, but also some of the speakers reached out after the event and talked about the value in creating this event, which was really, we had this buzz going on and we felt, okay, we want to continue this. And this is the first series of the Head Heart Talks, and we're hoping to continue it throughout the year before the next event, which is to be at the end of the year. So another festival for 2022. And it being February, the month of love, we thought, okay, why and how important is it to bring that authentic self to work? And how can we be more authentic with our communication? And who else to talk about this with? We picked Ashok to, bounce ideas and just go into this topic because it's so important, right? So please introduce yourself, and then I'll dive in with asking a few questions, and we'll just flow with the topic of authentic communication.
Thank you so much, Talu. So I'm the founder of the Empathy Clinic, and there's a bit of a problem with that because I'm a psychiatrist. And psychiatry is interested in disease, especially mental disease. And I'm definitely interested in the human condition and how things can go wrong. But I'm actually much more interested in how to make things right, make them righter and the rightest. And that's by the quality of the experiences that we have, not just with ourselves and our own minds, but with each other, in our relationships, in our family relationships, in the workplace, and ultimately in society. And I think that empathy, for me, is a very important aspect of beginning to relate to each other in a safe way, so that when those safe interactions occur, they can hopefully allow people, especially in the workplace, to be more authentic when they're interacting with each other. And authenticity has to start with a feeling of safety.
Absolutely. It's intertwined, isn't it? It's just how it comes together.
It absolutely is. And, I run a psychiatric practice, so I see a lot of people who have post-traumatic stress problems and marriage problems and workplace problems, and of course, burnout. But the basis of it is a profound sense of discontent. People are not happy. And this is what attracted me to the conference, the Happitude conference, so much, because why don't we talk about happiness? Why don't we practice happiness? Why don't we practice making it possible for people to feel safe, feeling happy with each other? And if someone feels that somebody else is supporting them, it makes it easier for you to find your alignment again.
Yeah, and this is hence the whole concept of the idea of this conference, bringing the head and heart and, that exactly that alignment. And, when you talk about psychology, I mean, it's wonderful to see that the other angle on, the positive psychology now really focusing on the things that are working well. So what can we learn from there, which is a wonderful, the last 25 years plus of research that's coming through, which is supporting all of the science of happiness. And I think there are many facets of topics that we can go into. So we'll try and stay on track. So my first question is, how would you describe what is authentic communication?
Well, before we describe authentic communication, we really have to describe being authentic.
Yes.
and John Winnicott was one of my favorite psychiatrists. He started out being a child psychiatrist. Eventually, he ended up seeing adults. Maybe his patients grew up. But he came up with the concept of two aspects of who we are as people. We have our true self, and we have our false self. If you think of it, I've been a professional now for almost 40 years. And when you're a professional, you have to act professional. You have to behave in a professional way.
Yeah.
And when you're on an airplane and the captain's speaking, they also speak in a very professional way. Thank gosh. Is that who they are? Well, it's an extension of who they are, but it may not be precisely who they are. So we're actually encouraged, especially as children, when we're growing up, to hold your feelings in. If you're upset, you shouldn't be angry. You shouldn't snatch things. You certainly shouldn't hit anybody. And if you're boys, you shouldn't cry. And so we're trained to be inauthentic emotionally. And by the time we get to adulthood, especially if we're in certain roles that prescribe us to be a certain type of person who is acting professionally, we're actually behaving somewhat inauthentically. And I think this is a sad, shameful truth that happens in many professions. So my task, and this is another reason I'm so excited to talk to you today, is to make it possible for people to realize it's okay to feel how you feel. And it's okay to share that. And if you feel safe in sharing that, you'll feel so much more supported, especially in the workplace. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't behave professionally. Of course we should. There's all kinds of reasons why that's of value. But we need to be authentic at some level so we don't start hiding things that are really destructive to our sense of self.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just it's almost like, you put on that mask before you enter the workplace, right? And then when you come home, there's another mask perhaps or hat that you put on, and all of these labels in a way that we're carrying. It's exhausting, isn't it? I mean,
well, I think to a certain degree it is exhausting.
Yeah.
If I have to tell someone that they have cancer, for example, I have to hold it together. I have to look like I'm a source of hope.
Yeah.
So I understand there's plenty of very, very good reasons why we need to have some. If I go home and I'm sad or I'm upset or I get into a fight with my family, or I need to go out and have a drink to cope with that, there's something wrong with how I'm managing my feelings. So that means I need to find my people after a difficult day like that to make sure that I'm emotionally supported. This is why I think it's so important for people to have a safe way to feel authentic with each other.
So what you're saying is, this is why it's important to bring this to workplaces. So first of all, it's like going back and creating that safe space. And of course, this comes along with how safe is it with your peers? How safe is it with your boss? How safe is it with your staff? I mean, it goes across different levels. That's another discussion, right? How that can pan out in a way. I mean, I find, first of all, you're coming into work, you're wearing a mask, perhaps, right? Not completely authentic. And it comes down to, as you say, not having that trust, not having that space to truly express, be yourself. And so how important is it then that we are authentic in the workplaces?
I think it's very important to know that it's possible. I think we have to tolerate moments when it may not be completely possible. I mean, a lot of this stuff comes from my experiences with wars.
Yeah.
And, being a psychiatrist, I was so relieved when post-traumatic stress disorder finally got acknowledged in our field in 1980. That's 35 years after the Second World War. I mean, are you kidding? But it took that long to say, that it's okay if you have a stress response to distress. So we have to stop the idea that if something happens to you that makes you feel poorly, either physically or emotionally or socially or spiritually, it's okay to seek counsel. Now, historically, people would often go see the shaman of the tribe, or they would speak to a priest, or they would speak to. So psychiatry and having access to a psychotherapist, has sort of taken such a stronghold. And just to make a slightly side commentary, because we live in these huge cultures where people are essentially estranged from each other. And how many of us know our neighbors that well? And I think that's become a phenomena because we don't live in these little contained villages where everybody knows everyone and everyone knows your stories as well. So I think being authentic is definitely being a little bit more problematic in the time and age that we live in. And I don't want to get into social media too much, but that creates a false sense of emotional protection and safety, because if I'm texting something and I say something vulnerable, that might end up online everywhere, you see. So I think, I'll let you ask your next question.
Yeah. Well, I was just leading on to, what sort of challenges stop us from being authentic at work? And, as we said, not having that safe space. But why is it that we are not able to create a safe space?
Well, my answer to that is the word shame. And shame is a very powerful emotion. And the problem with the shame is that someone can be ashamed and you won't be able to tell they're ashamed. They might be the most highest functioning person in the workplace. They might be extremely productive. They may look the happiest. They may be the loudest person at the party. And then we find out that they've killed themselves. So
and it all goes, sorry, I was just going to add, how it all goes back to this upbringing or society belief of having to do things correctly, working hard, not failing, how it's all interlinked, where we're not, able to embrace making mistakes, feeling ashamed of making a mistake. And so it's, that's the first thing, isn't it? Not being able to be vulnerable.
Well, let me define shame, because I think people think shame and guilt are the same thing, and they're not. So guilt is when you own up to a wrongful act. So if someone says, you did that and that was wrong, you say, yep, I did that. That was wrong. Guilty as charged. When you're guilty, you can still feel like a good person. Shame is when you've done something wrong and it affects your whole being. So you actually feel like a bad person. So someone who's guilty can be in public and still feel pride. Someone who's ashamed may have to fake that pride, because on the inside, they're actually beginning to feel like a bad person. That's why shame can be so destructive to the person and also to the places that they are. And that's why when I work with people, I often ask them how they feel inside as a person. And when it's not that hard to tell, because I often start crying when I ask that question, if they're overloaded with shame and they've not had a chance to discuss that with anybody. So I think shame is what we need to have a much gentler approach to allow people to reveal that, and then find ways to, whatever their issue is, to come out of that without feeling too shamed, or that they're revealing shame or judged.
Yeah, exactly. Being judged, right? This is things that we talked about at the conference as well, and how to bring our best self to work. And part of it all, building that space of trust, but being aligned with doing the things that we love to do. And when you say you talk to your clients about giving them the space to address how they feel, can we bring that more to the workplaces and the relationships?
I think we have to, but there's often barriers. So classically, what happens to me if I speak at a conference on burnout at a hospital, there might be a few hundred people in the audience. And at the end of it, I'll say, are there any questions? And nobody puts their hand up. And then afterwards, in the coffee break, I can see someone kind of hovering. Then they come up to me and they say, I want to ask you some questions, but my boss was in the audience and I didn't want to ask you that question when my boss was there. That's the problem.
It comes back to that feeling afraid, shamed, not being able to be vulnerable.
So what has to happen is the pyramid has to be inverted, if I can do this, which means that the leadership has to make it safe for the people that they're responsible for to be safe emotionally so they can reveal what's really going on. I mean, it's important for a leader to know what's happening in the workplace. If you're running a factory, for example,
Yeah.
it's important to know, that things are working well there. But it's also important to know the emotional well-being of the people that are working there, how their life is going. Because if you're having a better life, you're definitely going to be more productive at work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you said, just, turning that triangle upside down, for me, just symbolizes almost like a cup. Yeah, just opening up and allowing to, be a vessel so that your employees, your staff, are able to take care of themselves. And I'm just, as you said it, I could just visualize it. And creating that space of, but also being that being too in response when you are open and showing that you're able to make mistakes too as a boss, or it's creating a safe space. And because I find when I talk to people, as you mentioned, where their boss is perhaps in the room and they won't be able to say something because they feel afraid, that there are many cases where the boss also feels that there's things that they want to share but don't feel it's appropriate, right? So it goes hand in hand. Everyone's in this together. I mean, we all feel
I'm sorry, I'm excited of what you're saying, because my office is full of managers and bosses and leaders who are terrified of admitting to anyone that they're having a problem.
Right.
And they come and see me, and of course I'm only too happy to try and help them. But the sad thing is they don't have anyone to talk to. And the problem is, the higher you go up that pyramid, there's less people who think, everyone thinks that you've got it going on great because you're at the top of the pyramid. Those are the loneliest people.
Exactly.
If they can't ask some of their managers, can I have a chat with you about what's going on at home?
Exactly.
And I think this is what needs to change. We need to make it normal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I don't run a company, I have a psychiatry office, of course. I would have a gym where if people worked out there 2 or 3 times a week, they get a bonus. And I'd have breakout huddles where managers and everyone could get together and have some emotional exchange. So they actually get to know each other, but also constantly practice the feeling of emotional safety with each other. That, I think, would have a big impact, but we're just not quite there yet. That's why these things that your conference and these types of conversations hopefully would get people thinking differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Creating these initiatives and bringing this awareness is exactly what we're doing, and the idea behind it, so that we can bring it to the HR and corporate, so that they can actually filter through and see that these are simple initiatives that we could do to create that safe space and trust, so that whether it's up, down, or down, up, are able to share and authentically. I mean, what comes to mind here for me is the 3 gates of speech. Every time you open your mouth, whether it's, is it true, is it kind, and is it necessary? I mean, all these things where just a simple form of communication, if we just run ourselves through these 3 gates, no matter who it's with, a stranger or an employee, or in our relationships at home and so forth. And I think if we're able to generate initiatives where we allow for it to grow into more safe space, then I think we're getting through slowly, right? I think more initiatives will come, the interaction will come, and being more mindful of the way we talk to each other, so that it's not only about those feelings, but knowing that I can turn up and share what's on my mind right now. Because this is the first step. When we start to express, we start to exchange and have a point where we can actually start to solve situations if things are, need to be discussed or work through. Otherwise, we don't know.
So Talu, I'm going to give you a bit of personal feedback that might be difficult for you to hear.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to do that, of course, but that's what I say to my clients.
Yeah.
And I think that feedback that's critical might be difficult to hear for some people.
Sure.
But my rule of thumb is this: if my feedback helps the person, and it's constructive, I'm going to green light that. If it's only destructive, there's no way I'm going to allow that to come through. So critical feedback for me, I mean, heck, that's my job, right? People come to me to get critical feedback on themselves. So I have to be comfortable in providing that in a safe way, but also to be continuously looking out for their emotional safety in that space. And when I preface, which is what I just did with you, I'm going to say something about you, this person might be difficult for you to, that's not necessarily comfortable to hear that. But at the same time, it lets the person know that my intent is not to be hurtful. My intent is to be helpful. And it works about 80 to 90% of the time. And that's not a bad number. And the people it doesn't work, and this is not applying to you in any way, are people who are narcissistic. That's the time it doesn't quite work so well, because they don't want to hear any feedback at all that doesn't aggrandize them. But I think, again, I don't want to talk about narcissism too much, but the problem with the pyramid is that a lot of people that get up there are narcissistic. And they're not interested in these conversations. You know, when I go to these conferences or speak to other people, I have yet to have, well, I had a few, but most people are absolutely on task with making sure that there's authenticity and safety in these spaces. Some of the people we actually need to get to are people who don't want to listen.
How would you encourage it? Encourage the safe space and, you know, creating that triangle to flip over. What could you suggest?
I think if you get a job at Starbucks, they spend about half a day teaching you. I think they spend actually 2 days teaching you how to do the job. Wouldn't it be cool if people took on a new job, they had to spend some time learning how to communicate safely, learning how to be authentic safely, learning how to receive and listen actively, learning how to empathize. Not everyone's going to get a gold star, of course, but if that became part of the initiative of starting in the workplace, especially in places like hospitals or law offices or corporations or businesses that are run by that kind of really hard driving mentality, the people crunchers, I call them, wouldn't it be cool if we had some, instead of having sensitivity training after something's happened, why not have that sort of fairly continuously? Exactly. And when I worked at hospitals, every year you have to recertify in first aid, and every year, why can't we recertify in mental health aid? I mean, there's simple ideas, and it just takes a little bit of time to do that, but it's so valuable to the ethos of the workplace.
Yes, that's so beautiful, you know, and it's not only for service industries, but it's also for just, you know, the skills on how to work with others, so within colleagues, and so it's for everyone. It's you know, and I think there's so much benefit there. And as you say, keeping it on track so that it's a kind of regular initiative that you do with the team, so that, you know, it is a once a year workshop or so. I mean, this is something.
Well, it's like a teenager's bedroom. Right. If you don't attend to it regularly, it will turn to chaos. And human beings.
I've got one of those.
Right. Okay. Well, mine are all older now. But I think it to have regular application, so the chaos can be brought back to a meaningful sense of alignment. I think it's okay. Is it a little bit of work? Absolutely.
Yes.
But there's so much evidence that preventative maintenance is so much more effective than waiting for things to break and then seeing what you're going to do after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that, you know, it's like bringing that calm in the chaos, right? Yeah, wonderful. So I have one last question, you know, how can we maintain authenticity?
I think maintenance of authenticity has something to do with self-awareness. And, you know, I spend a lot of time with my own self-awareness. You know, I'm a very physical person. I'm also a musician and a writer. So I do lots of things that are not sort of being a medical doctor. And I do that because I don't want to be defined by one thing that takes me away from the rest of my identity. And it's a strange thing to say, but we have to practice being ourselves. Isn't that a funny thing to say? You'd never tell a child, a 5-year-old, you need to practice being yourself. But I'm seeing this on LinkedIn, for example, everywhere that people are saying that you need to practice being authentic and being yourself. What happens is that we get into these roles, we enact those roles, and we forget who we are.
Well, and who else we could be, right? Because we're constantly growing.
And in this culture, we tend to define ourselves by our occupation. And that is a piece of who we are, but we don't define ourselves by who we are in the soul level. And that is the everythingness of who you are, your thoughts, your feelings, your dreams, your desires, your creativity, your humanity, and all those things kind of put together. And that's a big ask to say to someone, who are you? Like, how much time do you have to answer that? But if you're keeping that on your emotional radar as something that's relevant for you to keep finding yourself realigning to, then I think that sense of authenticity becomes a little bit easy to find. And before we had GPSs, sometimes I would get hopelessly lost in my car. And my wife would say, you should pull over and ask someone. I said, I know exactly where I'm going. I didn't have a clue where I was going. I didn't want to be embarrassed. I didn't know where I was going. So if we can have a GPS on our soul, so we're always knowing kind of where we're going. And if we get off task a bit, we know how to find our way back there. To me, that would be kind of cool. A global positioning soul device,
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually written about something like this, very similar.
Oh, really?
So using that, your inner GPS to align, where are you going to choose to
Beautiful.
be a grumble positioning situation, or are you going to choose to be in a gratitude position today? So, playing with those words and acronyms and how we can use it to align, be more present, and make soundful choices, right? And as you said, how you do all sorts of things to connect to your authentic self. Similarly, I would do the same. So not would, I do. In fact, meditating, also quite active, and also striving to keep on growing. I don't want to stop, and admitting when I don't know something and being okay with that.
Well, that's a human condition, isn't it? We all know a little bit in our little kind of corner. Like I know a lot about a little bit of things in the world, and there's most things I have no clue about. So we have to tribe up so that we can find complementarity with each other. That's the nature of humanity, is that we have to tribe up with each other, not just to survive, but to thrive. Exactly. And the moment we forget that, we get kind of alienated and paranoid from each other, we're actually missing out on something that very important that can happen, is that we can actually be very helpful to each other, not just physically by sharing goods and services, but socially and emotionally. And I think this is why the Happitude program, I think, is so important to continue to talk about, because human beings really are here for each other.
Absolutely. And, connecting to that inner compassion, whether it's for ourselves and definitely for others, and bringing that more to workplaces. And this is where I feel, we're, it's not on in that mask at times when we come to work, or that label that we're carrying. Or today I'm a doctor, or obviously a doctor is more compassionate, but in a different job, perhaps, where it's more regimented and not focused on being more compassionate to others. So, how can we bring that more into the workplaces and being authentic? Yeah, I mean, I loved this talk today, and, listening to you share all the insights, and, just to bring this awareness and start talking about it. And I'm so excited about this year of what this Head Heart is going to bring together.
Thank you so much for being on the show. It was a delight speaking to you. Look forward to speaking to you again, hopefully in the near future.
Yes, and thank you so much for your time and your presence. Thank you.